So what did you check out this month?
I watched Deep Space Nine Season 2. A lot of people said that Season 1 wasn't great and that Season 2 is where it picks up, but I really thought Season 1 was pretty good already, and Season 2 feels like more of the same. In some ways, I would say that Season 1, I feel like I kind of liked better, I think because I saw the potential in all the characters and all the relationships between them. But already in Season 2, it feels like they're kind of set as who they are, and they don't really make any advancement in any kind of way, even when characters get episodes focusing on them. Just like with TNG toward the end, it feels like it doesn't really matter. You could skip that episode and you wouldn't be missing anything. That's not to say those episodes weren't good, it's just that it doesn't feel like they made a lasting impact in the world of the show. So that was a little disappointing. I will say this season did have more episodes that stuck out as being especially good, I would say. The opening three-parter with Frank Langella, Richard Beymer, and Louise Fletcher was pretty good. I wasn't expecting a three-parter, so I guess that's the first three-parter in Star Trek. I was really surprised that the Quark love interest episode was good. I really enjoyed that one, and I do like Quark a lot, but I wasn't expecting them to give him that kind of development. But again, it felt like it didn't matter once the episode was over, which was really disappointing. They introduced the Maquis. That two-parter was really good. I liked the whole moral dilemma behind it. It feels like that's what they tried to do for a lot of TNG episodes, and it didn't really work. But in this two-parter, I thought it did. And I really liked the last episode, the Jem'Hadar, which kind of brought the Dominion more into it. They had mentioned them a couple times before, but without really saying much. I thought it was interesting that it felt like it was just going to be a fun episode in the way that it started, with Sisko, Jake, Quark, and Nog going camping, basically. And I was on board for that. But then it turned out to be more than that, and it was good. I still like pretty much all the characters, but again, it feels like they're kind of set in their ways now, and they're not really going to change too much. I felt like they tried to do the most with Kira, but I can't help feeling like most of it didn't really matter and didn't really go anywhere. So I still feel like there's potential here, but they need to do a bit more with the running subplots like they did with Worf and TNG. That's what we need. But it's not bad. It's definitely way better than TNG was toward the end. I am enjoying it. I was surprised that Sisko didn't get more focus, and I was kind of disappointed with that because I do like Sisko, but he really was there were only a couple episodes that really had him as a major player, and one of them was the Paradise Planet or whatever, which I didn't really care for that much. So it did feel like some episodes were kind of generic Star Trek episodes of just throw this plot at them and just whatever, let it play out, and then it doesn't matter once it's over. But I feel like there was less fake science crap in this season, and it was more character stuff, which is good, because that's what, at least they know how to write that, but they don't really know how to write the sci-fi stuff. So yeah, it was still good. I will keep going. I'm glad the writers seem to be interested in writing these characters, at least. I just wish, again, that there was something more to kind of keep it going. Do you have anything you want to say about Deep Space Nine at this point?
It's been a long time since I've watched the show, so I don't really have a lot of input. I'd have to watch it again.
Okay, yeah, I'm sure like a lot of the seasons would kind of blend together over time, too. I watched Soylent Green from 1973. Have you seen this movie before?
Once.
Okay.
And the only thing I was familiar with before was the twist.
Yeah, and would you say that it left any kind of impact on you, really?
No.
Yeah, I had seen it before this, too, and I barely remembered anything about it. I mostly remembered it being kind of boring. I didn't think it was boring this time, but it feels like so much of it is the twist, is kind of building up to the twist, and it doesn't really have enough going on in the rest of the movie to really back that up. It's definitely not bad. So basically, Charlton Heston plays, it's been a while since I watched this was at the beginning of the month, but he plays a sort of like a policeman, I guess, who is investigating a guy that was murdered in his, I don't know, super expensive apartment or whatever. It's supposed to be like that for the future. And basically, him following the clues leads to some kind of secret about the Soylent Corporation or whatever, which is a company that makes food for people in the future. And it's this future, basically, everything sucks. It's like living in just
2023.
Well, yes. Yeah, we're not too far away. I thought it was funny that they seem to be kind of trying to show that overpopulation is going crazy by having people just sleeping all over the place in these rooms and buildings and stuff, but they don't have to be sleeping on top of each other. You can go sleep somewhere. I don't know. There's enough room to go sleep somewhere else. So I don't know. I get what they were going for, but it was unintentionally a little bit funny. And I thought it was funny toward the end that there's kind of a shootout scene between Charlton Heston and some bad guys, and they run into a building where it's one of these sleeping buildings or whatever. So everybody's asleep in there, but there was just a huge gunfight right outside the building, and somehow nobody woke up. But then now when they're sneaking around, they're trying to be real quiet to not wake people up. So that was unintentionally funny too. I thought the cast was pretty good. I liked Edward G. Robinson. I actually didn't recognize him with all his facial hair and not being in a silent movie and stuff. So it's definitely not a bad movie. It's just that it's like one of those Twilight Zone episodes where it leads up to the twist, and it just maybe takes a little too long to get there.
Yeah.
But it was okay. I watched Midsommar again, which we did an entire video on, a short video. It was still really good. I still think that the characters are the only really weak point. I still think it was a mistake to make them so unlikable. And I will say, I don't think we said this in the video. Maybe we did. I didn't go back to watch it again. But the cinematography is really good in this movie. So still definitely recommended to anybody who's fans of things like The Wicker Man, or I would say like Invasion of the Body Snatchers. I would say kind of the way everybody is kind of acting weird and you don't know who to trust and that kind of thing. I feel like it has that same kind of element to it. Definitely worth checking out. I watched Johnson Family Vacation from 2004. So this was not my choice. This is definitely not a movie that I would say, yeah, I'm going to sit down and watch this. You've got Cedric the Entertainer, who I do think is funny, as the father of this family that's going to travel across the country to go to like a family reunion or whatever. And his brother is played by Steve Harvey, who can also be funny. But this movie very much felt like they had a script for just a generic comedy movie, and then they just stuck in some actors and said, you know what, whatever. So the actors, the ones that are funny, which is pretty much those two, they don't have a chance to do anything with their characters in this movie for the most part, because they're just kind of stuck in there. So Cedric the Entertainer is playing kind of the straight guy, who is kind of like the stuck-up dad that's kind of old-fashioned and kind of boring. And, I mean, that doesn't exactly lend itself well to his type of comedy. And then Steve Harvey's playing kind of a dick, so he's kind of playing himself in real life. And then you have, like, Vanessa Williams, who is not a comedy actress and doesn't have anything to do. You have, like, Beyonce's sister, who is in there because she's Beyonce's sister. You've got freaking Lil Bow Wow, or whatever his name is, who is not very good, but is in this movie because he's known. And that's pretty much the movie. It wasn't as bad as I thought it was probably going to be. It was mostly just very generic and innocuous and whatever. There was some questionable humor in it. There was a scene with a guy taking a crap in the restroom, and it was just so stupid and out of place for the rest of the movie, which was fine. There were times that I laughed. It wasn't terrible. It just wasn't good. And the thing that I thought was funny, the thing that made me laugh the most, was the writers or filmmakers' complete misunderstanding of American geography, because they're traveling across the country, and at one point they have like a screen in their car, and it tells them that they're entering Nevada, but the screen makes it look like they're going into New Mexico. And then at one point they say they're going to Boulder City, and at first I was thinking, okay, that's in Colorado, but no, Boulder is in Colorado, Boulder City is in Nevada, and the map doesn't ever show them going to Nevada, but it does show them going to Colorado. And then later on they say they're going into New Mexico, but the map already showed them doing that or something. I don't know. They had no idea what the hell was going on. It made no sense. And that pretty much describes the approach to this movie. It wasn't terrible, but it was just very generic and just kind of like, we got to make a movie, some dumb generic comedy movie, and that's it. So again, a couple things were funny, but overall it was just kind of whatever. By the time it was done, I was just waiting for it to be over. And it was a waste of the at least couple of comedy actors that you had in the movie. So yeah, I would say skip this one. I read The House on the Borderland by William Hope Hodgson. This was from 1908. In one of our earliest of these videos, I talked about reading The Boats of the Glencarrig by Hodgson and how much I loved it. Somebody asked me for my top 5 horror novels, and I put that in there. I liked it that much. So I was really excited for this. This is the Hodgson book that always pops up when people talk about him. It's definitely his most popular one. So you've got these two guys that are on a camping trip, and they come across this huge abyss opening up in the ground that seems to drop into forever. And there's kind of a piece of land that juts out over it with part of a wall of what used to be a building that has apparently fallen in. And they go and check it out, and they find this manuscript buried in the rubble. And the majority of the book is the manuscript. which is written by a guy that used to live in that house. And this was kind of out in the middle of nowhere in Ireland, kind of out in the woods. And he talks about how this house was shunned for hundreds of years as being haunted or something. And he just lives there with his sister and their dog. And one day he's just sitting in a room by himself when the candles start flickering and changing colors, and one of the walls seemingly disappears. And he has this vision of this plane on some alien planet that stretches out forever. And he's kind of wondering what the hell's going on when suddenly everything goes back to normal. But then he has this weird astral projection out-of-body experience where he seems to be flying out through space out to this planet where the plane is. And he comes to this, what he refers to as an arena, which is kind of surrounded by mountains. And in the center is what looks like his house, but it's made out of glowing green stone. And as he's looking, he sees that in the mountains around him are these god beings that look like gods from different mythologies. And he thinks they're statues at first, but then he realizes they seem to be alive. And around the house is this humanoid pig monster thing that is trying to get in. And he finds himself back in his normal house. A day has gone by, apparently while he was having this vision, and now he's super hungry. He doesn't know what the hell's going on, but it's freaking weird. And for a long part of the book from there, he starts getting attacked by these pig monsters that look like the one he saw in the arena. And they seem to be coming up out of this hole in the ground that keeps kind of expanding as the story goes on. And a lot of the book is just him. It's kind of like an I Am Legend or Night of the Living Dead kind of thing where he's barricading his house and they're all around, and luckily he's got several guns with him, so he's just blasting them. That stuff was pretty cool. Hodgson is good at making things feel realistic when you're with a character in a situation where they're kind of struggling to survive. And that stuff was really effective. The stuff earlier on with the weird visions and stuff, I didn't think that was a good way to kind of get things started, because it didn't go on for that long, but it felt like it went on for a while, because at that point you have no connection to the character. You don't know literally anything about him, and you're just kind of watching as he sees all this weird stuff, and you have no idea what it means or what the point of any of it is. But once he gets back to the house and he's dealing with the monsters, that stuff, there's a little bit more to grab hold on in terms of connection to reality. So that stuff was pretty good. Eventually he goes out to explore the hole, and by the time you get to the end of the book, he's had more weird visions of flying all through space to the end of the universe and the end of time. And you see all these huge cosmic epic things of stars dying and things exploding and all this crazy stuff. And it went on for way too long because, again, there's no human connection to anything, no characters. It's just watching chapter after chapter of stars exploding and planets dying and time going faster and everything flying around.
Yeah, that sounds so boring. If that happened in real life, I would be like, what's on Netflix?
See, that's the thing, is it sounded really cool, and it probably sounds cool the way I'm describing it. But reading it, it's just, it's kind of a thing where you need things to stick out amongst kind of all the stuff that's happening, but instead it just feels like one thing after another, after another, after another, and then you finish the chapter, and the next chapter is the same thing, and the next chapter is the same thing, and it just keeps going like that. And by the time it's done, I did like how it ended, for the most part. He did kind of do the Lovecraft thing, unfortunately, he actually did it a couple times, where this guy's writing, it kind of doesn't, it breaks the realism a little bit, because this is supposed to be, he's writing this stuff in his manuscript after it has already happened, and every once in a while he'll go back to it and say, here's what happened since the last time I wrote. But there's a couple times toward the end where he's writing and he's saying, I can hear the monster coming at the door, it's about to get me, like blah blah blah, and it's like, why are you sitting there writing that? Go grab your guns. And Lovecraft did that a lot, and yeah, it was unintentionally funny. So it was a little bit annoying because it broke the realism. It was kind of a little too hokey for the way the rest of the book was. And that only really happens at the end. It happens a couple times. But I did like the actual ending. I liked how you get back to the campers and they're like, what the hell was that? Trying to weigh the evidence of whether this guy was crazy or if this stuff really happened based on what they can see. They know that there's this huge abyss and this house apparently fell into it. And they kind of ask people around of what they know about the area and stuff like that. I liked that stuff, and I like that you don't get answers, which you didn't get answers in the Glenn Carrig either, but I feel like it was a little too vague as to what the point of everything was. I read this for a book club, and that's kind of what people said too. We were trying to figure out what the point of the whole story was. I think it was probably just him writing a horror story where he's kind of giving you a way of looking at the world that is unique and different and scarier than you would normally think of just reality, depending on who you are. It was okay. Parts of it were cool. I liked when he was fighting the monsters and stuff, but I didn't like it anywhere near as much as Glenn Carrig. So it reminded me of From a Buick 8 a little bit by Stephen King,
Yeah.
because you've got creatures from other dimensions coming in, and Stephen King tells you in that book that there's not going to be an explanation for everything.
That scene with that dog still sticks with me, and I read that book so long ago.
Yeah, even that, I mean, there's a scene kind of like that in this book. I wonder if this was a big influence on that. I could definitely see that. So it was okay. It was disappointing, but it definitely wasn't bad. I think if I didn't have such high expectations, I might have liked it more, but I still would have thought that those flying through space scenes were just kind of boring and just went on for way too long. It reminded me of The Time Machine also, the 1961, where he's going through time and he sees all kind of like the sun flying through the sky and stuff like that. I could see that movie being influenced by this, by the scenes in here. I read It by Stephen King from 1986. I had read this a long time ago.
So this is your second time reading it?
Yes. It was a lot different from what I remembered. I remembered things happening in a different order and scenes being different, but I wonder how much of it was me having seen the Tim Curry movie a long time ago also, which I saw the movie before I read the book the first time.
Well, that wasn't a movie, right? Wasn't it a miniseries?
Well, yeah, it was a miniseries, but whatever. And I have not seen the new ones. I tried to watch them. I wanted to watch them after reading this book, but they're not streaming anywhere right now, I think.
God forbid you have to pay for something.
Yeah. Well, see, because I don't expect to like them, so I don't want to buy them.
I don't think you're going to like them.
Yeah. The book was good overall. I definitely feel like some parts of it are way better than others. So for people that think this is a story about a clown that kills people, that's not really... The clown isn't even in it that much, and it's not a clown. It's a, I don't know, alien demon thing that takes the form of a clown sometimes, but it doesn't even take that form that much in the book. And it actually doesn't show up for long stretches of the book at all. And I think the stuff with Pennywise is weaker than the stuff that doesn't involve him. I think the stuff that's really good in here is Stephen King just writing about these kids in the 50s, dealing with bullies going through their lives. I think he's way better at writing kids than adults a lot of the time, and that definitely comes through in here, especially when you go back and forth between the kids in the 50s and the kids as adults in the 80s.
I also think it helps that the dialogue for the kids say weird, dumb things, and Stephen King writes people saying weird, dumb things, but adults don't talk like that, but kids might talk like that.
Yeah, well, see, that's the thing, too, is he didn't write the dumb dialogue so much for the kids, but he did for the adults sometimes. I thought something that he did really well with the kids was having them... Somebody would say something and a kid wouldn't understand what it meant or what they were referring to, but they would pretend they did, the way that kids do. You know, like if a kid says something to another kid and it's like, hey, you know, whatever, and the other kid would be like, yeah, of course I do. It's like, no, you don't. You're just a idiot kid. That was something he did really well here. I think one of the weakest parts of the book is the first 200 pages or so, where you get a case in the 80s involving Pennywise that feels like an episode of like CSI or something. It just goes on for way too long, and it doesn't really matter. And then you get the character introductions where each one of them gets an entire section devoted to them that usually is from the perspective of a different character that in many cases is never going to show up again, but you're still going to get that other character's entire backstory in that section, and you do not need that. He could have cut that first 200 pages down to like 50 pages, and the book would have been better for it. And I think there were some parts later that he also could have... There's at least 2 other times where you get the same thing, where it's a section focused on each character, but they all play out the same way. They're going to go through, walking through Derry, they're going to go see something they remember, and then they're going to have some kind of weird encounter with the demonic being or whatever. And knowing how they're all going to play out, you're just kind of sitting there waiting for it to get over with. And a lot of those horror scenes are not super effective in this book. I think part of the thing is that he spends so much time developing the town and fleshing out these scenes with the characters in a really effective way, but then when something pops up, like some kind of monster or whatever, he's very vague about it, and it feels like he's kind of trying to rush forward or try to make it more exciting or something, and he doesn't take the time to develop those scenes in the same way. And it's to the point where sometimes I'm wondering what the hell I'm supposed to be imagining, or exactly what's happening, or what the characters are looking at. And I can think of, for example, there's a scene where this kid is thinking about watching the movie Rodan with the giant pterodactyls, and he sees a giant bird and he says, oh, it's Rodan. So I was picturing Rodan, but then he starts describing it as having feathers and all this other kind of stuff. And at that point I was thinking maybe Stephen King just doesn't remember Rodan because the way he was describing the movie wasn't completely accurate either. But then it turns out the kid later says it didn't look anything like Rodan, but it was the spirit of Rodan. So I don't know, maybe he could have said that first instead of toward the end of the scene. Say it doesn't look exactly, it looks like a giant bird, but it was reminding the kid of that or something. There are a lot of scenes like that where you think you're supposed to be imagining one thing, but it turns out it's not quite like that. Or the scene with what he described as things that look like macaroni noodles with wings attacking somebody, and it turns out they're supposed to be like leeches, but I was picturing macaroni noodles with wings. So I don't know. And one of them bites a hole in somebody's arm that I don't know if Stephen King realizes what sizes are of things in real life, because he says it was the size of a dime, which is a huge hole to have in your arm for an adult. And this was an 11-year-old. But it seems like it's nothing. It just kind of gets glossed over. I mean, he did say there was a lot of blood coming out, but then later it's not like, oh, I had to put a Band-Aid on it or I had to go to the hospital because I was losing, a dime-sized amount of blood out of my arm. There was a scene, too, where they're making the silver ball bearings. And he says that the molds they use are 2 inches in diameter. But then later he describes them as being really small or something. And I was thinking, they're shooting these from a slingshot. Freaking 2-inch ball bearings are gigantic. But he says that they're really small. So I don't know. And that was literally like the next page. So I thought that was a little weird. It felt like maybe he left off writing halfway through that scene, and then when he came back to it later, he forgot what size he made them. But overall, it is good. I think the ending would make it or break it for a lot of people. Maybe not make it or break it, but I could see it breaking it for people. Either you kind of go along with it and say, yeah, whatever, that's fine. Or you say, wow, that was dumb. It's Stephen King doing his kind of mysticism thing of normal things having more significance because you believe in them kind of thing, and the power of friendship, and it's very abstract in some ways. So I could see that being disappointing for a lot of people. And I know it was for some of the people that I talked to that read it. I didn't mind it so much, but it might also be because I know that Stephen King tends to do that for certain stories. And then, of course, there's the scene with the kids in the sewer doing things that you don't want to read about, but Stephen King's going to write multiple pages about it. I'm not going to go into detail, but it's a little bit, it's very strange, very weird, very out of place. It doesn't really make sense in the book in the first place. There's no reason for it to be there. And this is what everybody talks about when they say, wow, that book is messed up. Or, well, maybe there are some other things too, but I'll just say it's weird sexual stuff. It doesn't have anything to do with anything. It doesn't make sense in context. The first time I read it, I remember kind of just going along with it because I thought it was going to be explained later, and in a way, it kind of fits with the whole mysticism thing of making things more important, that, I don't know, adding additional mystical meaning to kind of things that don't normally have that. But reading it this time, it made no sense. It definitely should have been not in there, and it had no explanation. And this book does kind of tie in to Stephen King's larger multiverse kind of stuff. You do get some cosmology, weird universe creating stuff in here, but this is pretty much where all that stuff gets introduced. So it's not the kind of thing where you feel like you have to read all the Dark Tower books to understand this or something like that.
Right.
So overall, I did like it. Some parts of it I liked a lot. By the time it was done, honestly, I just wanted it to be over because I think a lot of since it focuses so much on the monster at the end, I think that stuff is a lot weaker. And I really think if he had written this as just a book about these kids in the 50s dealing with bullies, I think it would have been way better. And in that way, it reminds me of The Body, where you also have kids dealing with bullies back in the day. I don't remember when that one was set. I think that one was the 60s, but I don't remember. But that one was really good. And that's a part of different seasons.
I think it's amusing when you talk to people who are familiar with the story, and then you mention, it came from space. And they go, wait, what?
Yeah.
And I'm like, yeah, didn't you watch it or read it? And they're like, yeah, I don't remember that.
Yeah, I'm really curious to see what the new movies, how they kind of handle that. It definitely felt to me like the kind of thing where Stephen King started writing it and didn't have any explanations for things and just said, I'll figure that out later, and then just kind of made it up on the spot. That doesn't mean it doesn't work, but you can kind of tell that he didn't really know where certain things were going. And I think that's part of why you have those scenes that feel like they're fully fleshed out, but but then they don't end up mattering at all. And I guess he was too proud of what he had written, because they're not bad scenes, to cut them out. But for the benefit of the entire book, I think it would have been better if a lot of those had been cut out. So I guess I'd recommend it if you want to check it out, but just know that there's potentially some disturbing stuff, mostly in the last like 25%. There's a certain character that I had remembered a lot that had made a very strong impression on me that I don't think was in the Tim Curry version at all. And from what I read is in the new versions, but is completely toned down.
Who is this?
Patrick Hockstetter.
Yeah, one of the bullies.
Yeah, but he doesn't come in until toward the end of the book. Then he gets an entire chapter devoted just to him and his entire backstory. And then he's out of the story. And you could have cut his entire character out and it wouldn't have changed anything in the entire book. He doesn't do anything important. And he just really doesn't matter. He's just another bully character. And not an important one, but at the same time, he makes such an impact because he gets so much development in the little section that he's in, and just the things that he does, and he's so creepy, way creepier than Pennywise. So, I don't know, Stephen King needs to work on he needs to structure his books before he starts writing them, but I know he doesn't do that, and he talks about not doing that, so I think he could have benefited from that a lot.
And this was also pretty early in his writing career, right?
Relatively, and this was during his whole, like, cocaine binge era, so that potentially, I don't know if it explains things, but I guess it kind of explains some things.
And it's still going on, too.
Well, not according to him, but who the hell knows. I've been playing Breath of the Wild a lot.
Oh, good. Is it something you're going to continue playing? Because this is not the type of game you can put down for a couple months and then try and come back.
See, I don't know if I agree with that. I think, and that'll go into my negatives on it, but overall I really like it. I like the gameplay. I like the way you kind of keep unlocking things as it goes on. I like the variety of environments and enemies and weapons and stuff like that.
And I'm going to point out to the people watching this or listening to this right now that you have never played a Zelda game before. Is that correct?
Correct. And I'm not much of a Nintendo guy historically.
So let me point out to you that this was a whole new type of Zelda game. There was never a Zelda game like this before this one.
Yeah, I was aware of that. Is this an entirely new story or entirely new versions of these characters as well? Like, does it tie into any of the other ones at all?
All the Zelda games tie into each other. That's a real big can of worms because there's all these different timelines.
Okay.
It's very complicated. So technically they all relate to each other somehow, but playing one, you don't need to have played the other ones to really understand.
Okay, because one of my big negatives about this one is the story and the presentation of story. This game has given me no particular reason to care about anything that's going on, about any of the characters.
Yeah, I can see that.
And the way it presents information, a lot of the scenes that in other games would be story scenes, in here they feel more like just exposition dumps of characters just telling you things and giving you more and more information. And I just start zoning the hell out because, first of all, I don't really care, like I said, about what's happening. But also the way information is presented, it's just kind of, it feels like reading a textbook. It's like, here's this, and here's this, and here's this, and here's this. And on a visual front, there's nothing to look at. There's nothing, it doesn't feel like a scene where they said, how is this scene going to work? It feels like a scene where they said, well, we have to give the player this information. And it feels like that's really all they thought about. And then they just kind of put it together.
Are you talking about the memories? Have you gotten any of the memories yet?
I've gotten a couple of those. I feel like those probably will work better once I get more of them.
Yeah.
I feel like that's where the story is probably going to kind of develop more.
Yeah, and I think part of it is, the fact that you wake up and it's been, 100 years or something?
Yeah, and you don't have your own memories and stuff. But that's another thing, is every character that you meet pretty much says the same thing of, oh, you don't remember me, oh, let me blah, 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 blah. And it gets old pretty quickly when every interaction is basically the same. I don't know who these characters are, my player doesn't know who these characters are, so I honestly feel like Link looks when he's just standing there with no expression on his face, just listening to people talk at him. So, I don't know. I feel like they could have handled that better.
I will say that Miyamoto has always stood by his statement of the gameplay is more important than the story.
Yeah, and that's part of why I'm not a huge Nintendo guy. I don't usually play, I think I've probably said this before at some point, but I don't usually play games that are just there to be fun. I like there to be something more beyond just the gameplay. And in this game, I think there's enough. I mean, I am liking it a lot overall. And I think I probably will like it more by the time I get more of the story, and especially more of the memories and more of the character stuff and all that.
But I will say that Aonuma, who is the producer of the Zelda series, does not always feel that way. So there's a little bit of clash going on between them.
Okay. See, like Mario games, for example, I feel like are just fun and that's it. And,
right.
you know, there's no, you're not going to get character development or whatever.
Correct.
And there's nothing wrong with that if that's what you're into. And I can appreciate, I certainly appreciate what Nintendo does. And I think they, just in terms of innovation from a gameplay perspective, I don't think anybody else pushes things as much as they do. But for me, that doesn't really appeal to me, generally.
That's fair.
And I mean, the gameplay in here, it reminds me of a lot of other things. And I mean, you might know more about this, about the background of the game or something, about the development, but it feels like they were trying to tap into kind of certain audiences that maybe like me that normally wouldn't be, going out of their way to play something like this. Obviously, you have kind of the huge open world exploration stuff. The gameplay itself, the combat feels more developed than I would have expected for a Nintendo game, where usually it's just kind of like jump on the enemy, and I feel like they're usually more kind of like you have to use a certain strategy for certain kinds of enemies, but in here it just feels like there's a lot of variety in terms of the different kinds of weapons and how they feel and just stuff like that. And that's not really what I expected so much. Even just how many different weapons there are and how many different bows, and you're throwing the bombs and using all the different stuff.
Yeah, and you have your abilities, right?
Yeah.
The way people have managed to use those to pretty much break the game is really impressive, but it's not like Nintendo didn't intend that. They said, yes, this is possible. The possibilities are very open-ended.
Yeah, it definitely feels like you could play the entire game you could have two different people playing through the game and they could play it completely differently.
Oh, yeah.
Which is really cool. Even just all the kind of making food and making elixirs or whatever, it makes me think of things like Skyrim a lot. The gameplay kind of, I can't remember what I was thinking of. There was a game that it was reminding me of. I definitely see some Shadow of the Colossus influence with all the climbing and even just with the openness of the environment and even the look of parts of the environment. And even like the robots or whatever, they look very, Colossus-esque. So yeah, I am liking it a lot, but I do hope that I get more invested in the story and everything, because it doesn't feel like the kind of game. I'm generally not the kind of person in the first place where I feel like I have to, do every single thing that is there in the game or find every item or whatever. I don't usually play things like that. I used to back in the day, back when I had all the time in the world, as a kid. But I think of something like Skyrim or like Fallout, where I get completely into the world, and when I'm playing it, it feels like I'm living in that world. And I realize this is not trying to do that, but I just kind of wonder if without that element, if it's going to really sustain me through the whole thing like that, or if it'll be the kind of thing where as soon as I'm done with the main story, I'm just like, yeah, I'm done. I don't want to play anymore.
I read a review somewhere comparing Breath of the Wild to Tears of the Kingdom, which is the one that's after this one.
Mm-hmm.
And those are much more directly connected. And it said something like Breath of the Wild felt like excavating something, and Tears of the Kingdom felt like exploring what you had excavated, which I thought was pretty accurate, because there's a lot more story focus in the second one.
Okay. I definitely would be interested in seeing kind of how they progress from here, what they do in the next one. And I mean, part of why I played this is because everybody that I know talks about it and talks about Tears of the Kingdom or whatever and just will not stop. So part of it was curiosity, and part of it is just because everybody keeps telling me that I need to play it. This is not a game that I would go to other people and say, you got to check this out. But I do like it. And I think part of what I can see, too, is that the people that are telling me that I need to play it are people that I wouldn't think of as being video game people, really. So I think that also shows that it's reaching kind of a different audience. So I don't know, like something like Fallout, I would say that like you gotta play that. I wouldn't really say that for this.
You say that for Fallout, though?
Yeah, but they're going for different things. It's a completely different thing, but with similarities. You can kind of see the kind of the base elements. So yeah, I definitely like it. I'm definitely going to keep playing. And I was playing it in Japanese in terms of the audio, but with the English subtitles.
Oh, yeah, that's the way to do it.
I mean, for me, given that I know some Japanese, it's really throwing me off sometimes because the subtitles correspond to the English dialogue, not to the Japanese dialogue.
Correct.
So a lot of the times it is not what they're saying. They obviously completely rewrote it for English so that it would work in English, but the dialogue that they're saying in Japanese is not the same thing. I thought it was funny when you go to the fish people. What are they called? The something with a V.
Zora.
Oh, yeah, okay. Maybe not a V. That they talk about them, that you can tell which ones are older because they use formal speech or whatever. But we don't really have that distinction in English, so they all just speak normally. But in Japanese, it would clearly be a difference. So yeah, I don't know. It's a little weird. It definitely makes for a slightly disorienting experience.
Yeah, I could see that.
But I would rather listen to it in Japanese than in English.
Yeah, I was not a huge fan of the English voices, and I changed that pretty quickly.
And I did start playing Resident Evil 3. I say start playing. I played a decent amount of it.
The remake?
Yeah. And I have to say, I know a lot of people were disappointed with this one compared to 2, but I was definitely, I don't know if impressed is the right word, surprised and happy with some of the changes they made going from 2 to this one. The gameplay feels a lot better. The controls feel smoother. You kind of have like a dodge mechanic now. And when you get attacked by zombies, you can actually mash X to get out of their grasp. I've never successfully done that. So I don't know if you can just lessen the damage or if you can completely break free. But I always forget that you can do that because you couldn't do that in 2. So I always react too late. But yeah, those are definitely improvements over 2. I know one of the complaints people had was the way they handled Nemesis. And I don't know exactly what their complaints were, but I already have my own. I am assuming that these are the same complaints they had. Nemesis shows up right at the very beginning of the game before you've even encountered any enemies. And actually, the beginning of the game is kind of stupid. So Jill, your character, is in her apartment. And I think she gets a phone call or something, and somebody says, like, you got to get out of there. And it's like, okay, everything seems kind of normal, but then she starts hearing sirens outside or whatever. And then Nemesis just busts in, and you get this long, semi-interactive cutscene where she's escaping from him, just running away. And it really serves to immediately undermine his threat by making it look like he's very easy to get away from, because Jill is just, for the most part, she doesn't have any weapons, but she consistently manages to get away from him over this like 5-minute cutscene or whatever. It's probably not that long, but it just makes it makes him look really weak and pansy-like because it's just so easy to get away from him. So that is not a good way to set up your kind of main threat boss villain guy. And then it's really stupid too, because when she gets outside, the city is falling apart. There are zombies everywhere. How did she not notice that this was happening? It seemed like everything was normal while she was in her apartment eating her pizza or whatever. And then all of a sudden the entire city is overrun. It reminds me of the gun shop owner in the original Resident Evil 2.
What's going on in this town?
Hold on. I ain't got no clue, darling. By the time I noticed something was wrong, the entire city was infested with zombies.
By the time I noticed something was wrong, the entire city was infested with zombies. It makes her look stupid. They made Nemesis look weak. So yeah, they definitely needed to handle that differently. Plus, this and Resident Evil 2, the remake, all the cutscenes feel like they have no real thought put into them. It just feels like they're just, here's a cutscene of whatever. It's going to be awesome because there's explosions and monsters and whatever. But no, that's not what makes a good cutscene. The dialogue is maybe slightly better than Resident Evil 2. There were actually some, I guess I'd call them quips, that were pretty funny. But then there's still the typical, it still feels like a typical Capcom game in terms of the stupid dialogue and all that, and the dumb characters, and just everything's super cliched, and just everything plays out exactly the way you think it will, and not because I've already played the original. Also, this one feels a lot different from the original compared to Resident Evil 2, where you could kind of see what they were going from and kind of doing a new take on the same thing. This feels a lot more like its own thing, which I guess is good. At least for me, I feel like that's, in this case, that's something preferable. I think maybe also because 3 just wasn't as strong as 2 in the first place. And doesn't have as many memorable sections, and a lot of it's just kind of wandering around the city. I think this game improves on that by having you kind of more explore a part of the city. Instead of just running through it and just getting through and going to the next section, you spend more time there and you kind of have to open up different areas and do stuff like that. I think that works a lot better. But I think probably overall I'm still pretty early on in the game, so I'm pleasantly surprised compared to 2 and compared to my expectations from the way people talk about it.
I saw this mod someone just released. This was the original 3, not the remake, where you play as Nemesis. So
Okay.
you're basically just stomping all over the place looking for everyone to kill. So there's no suspense, obviously, because you are basically unstoppable. So you're basically just looking for people.
Yeah, I could see that being cool. And I have not actually gotten to a point where I fight Nemesis. Actually, no, that's not true. I've been running away from him a little bit. It's been a while since I played it because I've been playing so much Breath of the Wild. So yeah, I wonder how much difference there's going to be going forward between this and the original. Because I know a lot of people complained that they cut stuff out from the original, but already the whole game feels different. So, I mean, I don't know. I wonder how much similarity there's even going to be. Which, again, I guess overall I'm more interested, way more interested than I expected to be. It feels like they put a bit more thought into this one than into 2, I think. But they definitely mishandled Nemesis, that's for sure. Oh, and there's something that they did with the remake of 2 and 3 that, I mean, it feels like they cut corners on these games. There's a lot of instances during cutscenes of characters clipping through walls and stuff like that. And if it's in a cutscene, I would think it'd be easy to notice and make sure it doesn't happen. But it happens a lot. And there are a lot of times when characters are talking in the game, like not during a cutscene, and their mouths are moving but does not match the dialogue at all, and they have absolutely no expression on their face. And it's really distracting when somebody's talking, so you go to turn to look at them, and it just feels very unpolished when you're looking at them talking. So it's kind of distracting, and it definitely feels like, again, like they're cutting corners. But it's a relatively minor thing. And that's everything I did this month. So what did you check out this month?
All right, let's see here. Oh, motherfucker, did my mouse just run out of batteries? God damn it. All right, hang on. Let me get the wired one. All right. I watched the newest season of Takeshi's Castle, which was from this year, 2023. I think it aired in Japan a few months ago. You're familiar with Takeshi's Castle?
Yeah, I was going to say I didn't know that was still going.
Well, they haven't done anything for 34 years, so this is a new season.
Okay.
It was originally broadcast from 1986 to 1990, so they brought it back as a, for now, just one season thing, I think. But everyone was really excited. The people on the show, you even had people who had been on the show 34 years ago, which was really cool. Contestants, I mean.
Okay.
The only people they brought back who were part of the original show were Takeshi Kitano, obviously, and Hayato Tani, who played General Tani, who was really old. They're both really old, but for Tani, it's really funny because every time he pops up, people are like, damn, he's really old now. And I'll say Takeshi is really old, and he doesn't show up till the last 2 episodes, and it looks like he's checked out. I kind of felt bad for him. But everybody else is new or famous in Japan, like they have a lot of famous comedians or things like that, and they're all having fun, and it's great. It's just such a good atmosphere because the people who are working on the show and the people who are contestants in the show are all huge fans of the show. And they're just so happy and excited to be there. They have a lot of returning games, but they've made pretty much all of them a lot harder. And some of them, none of the contestants make it through, which is pretty funny. And the commentary is just as good as it was back then. Just having a really good time. You know, they have these plot threads that some people take seriously, but while the cutscene is going on, somebody will be like, why are we even doing these? These are so dumb. Or, you know, someone will be trying to stop the army from getting across and they'll fail and be like, you know, he's totally useless. Why is he even here? Like, they didn't even notice him. It was really good. It's 8 episodes long. Each one's about an hour. I really enjoyed watching it.
Where did you watch this?
It's streaming on Prime.
Okay. I will probably check it out. And this is not dubbed, correct?
Correct. I would say most people are familiar with the show, even if they don't realize it. In the States, it was on Spike TV as the Most Extreme Elimination Challenge. That was the name of it, right?
Yeah.
Where they dubbed everything, completely changed the premise of everything. So it's not related at all. It's just the footage is the only authentic thing from the original show. Because I think for that, they just made it a regular game show Whereas the actual storyline is Takeshi has his castle and this advancing army is trying to get to him to overthrow him.
Okay, I didn't know that.
Yeah, and General Tani is, I think it was originally his castle maybe, so he's leading the army. That's why he's trying to get it back. Yeah, you didn't know that?
No, that's really cool.
Yeah.
I mean, I've never seen any of the original Japanese, and I couldn't stand the dubbing jokes and stuff.
Yeah, the dub is completely different. So I really enjoyed that. It didn't feel like a cash grab. It felt like we really want to do this and we want to do it right. And watch Planet Terror from 2007, which is my favorite modern zombie movie, even though it was made 15 years ago now. So backstory, if you don't know, Quentin Tarantino and Robert Rodriguez grew up watching grindhouse movies, and in 2007, around that time, said, what if we did that and did a double feature? So Tarantino did Death Proof, and Rodriguez did Planet Terror. And they actually showed them in the theater at the time, back to back, which was really cool. And Death Proof is okay, but Planet Terror is so good.
I like them both a lot.
If I'm going to watch a Tarantino movie, Death Proof is not high on the list.
I'd put it definitely above his more recent stuff, for me.
Well, we're not talking about that one. We're talking about Planet Terror.
All right.
Planet Terror is great. It has great effects. It's got great characters. It's got great acting. And I was watching with someone who was not familiar with it. And every time someone would pop up, they'd be like, oh, wait, shit, they're in this movie? And I was like, yes. Because you got Bruce Willis, you got Josh Brolin, you got Rose McGowan.
Michael Biehn, Tom Savini, that guy from Lost.
It's just really good.
And the humor is what really makes it, what really ties it all together.
Oh, you got Jeff Fahey. Yeah, the humor is really good. And I think we've said this before, but Rodriguez, he makes whatever he wants to make. And if you and him align on what you like, you're really going to like it. And this is a case where I really like it.
I agree. This is one of my favorite movies.
So pretty much it's every zombie movie where there's this chemical that gets released that starts turning people into, I don't know if zombies the right word because they're not dead, but it infects them and then they basically turn into zombies. And there's a group that just has to survive. There are some versions, probably all the current ones, where you can watch it with the film, what's the word I'm looking for? The stock film, like old school filter on it.
Yeah.
Or you can watch it, in high def. There's also, which I'm not a fan of, you can watch it with the audio from the theater where they screened it, where people like laugh and react and stuff, which I find very annoying.
Yeah.
But it's very good. If you haven't seen it, it's definitely worth checking out. And Tarantino does stick himself in it, and his acting is just as terrible as it always is.
Yeah. What I was going to say is all you would need is to take a piss behind your seat to get the full theatrical experience once you have that audio playing.
I watched Who Framed Roger Rabbit from 1988. It's hard to really show what a huge impact this movie had back in the day. And I think part of that is all of the CGI shit that we have now. And if they made this movie today, it would just be all CGI and it'd be like, yeah, whatever. But this movie was a turning point in the revival of classic animation because at that point, nothing was really happening with that. And the effort that went behind the making of this movie was huge. And you can find behind the scenes stuff all over the place about how much work went into integrating all of the live action stuff with the animated stuff.
Is this Bob Hoskins?
Yeah.
Okay.
And as a story, it's kind of like whatever. It's really, for me, the visual of how everything works together so well. That's what I like about this movie. So if you're not familiar, Roger Rabbit is a cartoon character in a world where cartoon characters and real people live together. And he is framed, clearly from the title of the movie. And Bob Hoskins is a detective who does not like cartoons because of his backstory, which you find out later. And he has to work with Roger, and they have to save all of the cartoons. There's a lot of trivia facts on this movie, but I think it's impressive that they got the rights to use so many of these characters in one place. I mean, you got freaking Mickey Mouse, Bugs Bunny, Daffy Duck, Donald Duck, and they're all in one movie.
Okay, I didn't know that.
Got that freaking, I think that Jack in the Box from Harvey. Is that it? Harvey Tunes?
I don't know what that is.
Yeah, it's really cool.
Jabberjaw, does he pop up at all?
What the hell is Jabberjaw?
Jabberjaw, the shark. The Hanna-Barbera shark.
Oh, actually, I don't think there's Hanna-Barbera stuff. They also couldn't get Popeye. They couldn't get a lot of King stuff. Spielberg was behind this movie, and he had a lot of clout back then. I watched The Lost World, Jurassic Park. from 1997, which is a terrible movie. It is such a bad movie. It's been a long time since I've watched this one, and I actually had watched Jurassic Park not too long ago. What are your feelings on this movie before I just rip into it?
It has also been a long time since I've seen it. You know how I feel about Spielberg and him having things happen that don't make any sense. I know that happens for sure in The Lost World. I mean, I don't like Vince Vaughn. I don't really like the characters in that movie, other than maybe the hunter guy. What's his name? Roland?
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. I feel like he wastes a lot of good actors in that movie.
The biggest problem with this movie is that everybody is an idiot. The second biggest problem with this movie is the pacing. In the first one, which I do like, there are slow moments, like when Ellie is sitting with Hammond while he's eating the ice cream and they have that discussion, or at the beginning when they're on the little ride thing and they get off to watch the dinosaur hatch. And there are times when things pick up and they're hectic, but those are spread out. The pacing of the movie makes sense. In this one, it's like somebody said things always have to be moving fast. We always have to be in an action scene. No one can ever have any time to just take a breath.
You know, I will say, having read the books, that does describe, to a certain extent, the difference between the first and second books. Although the first book does have way more action than the movie does. But the second book, there's not really a plot running through it. Once you get everybody on the island, it's just kind of like, let's just throw dinosaur attack after dinosaur attack in a row for the entire book.
That is this movie. There are no breaks for the characters to just talk to each other about their situation, about their different perspectives, so that they might actually have a chance for some growth. And in the times that there actually could be a break, and the characters do have a chance to sit down, one of them will literally say, "I'm not going to talk to you," and they'll walk away, which leads them directly into the next action scene. It was very frustrating, and the whole movie felt so tired, even though the people behind this movie were the same people behind the first movie. Everything about it, the story, the characters, even the music felt bland. Like in the first one, the music was used so effectively, and in this one, John Williams was like, "Oh, yeah, something's happening, Even the theme of this one is just lame. It's like everyone was banking on those Spielberg shots, and you know what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
And there being dinosaurs, and saying, that's enough. Where the first one had those Spielberg shots, I mean, most of his movies have those shots, clearly, but they were surrounded by other things that made sense. In this one, you just have people running around, they'll put a Spielberg shot, and then people would just be running around again. And because the first one was so successful, they thought, this one's just going to make a lot of money. It doesn't even matter, which happens for a lot of sequels for things. And they were right. People flocked to this movie and it made a bunch of money, despite it being a really bad movie.
Yeah, and I'm pretty sure that is kind of the story behind the whole development of that movie. I know Spielberg wasn't really interested in the actual production of it. I can't remember why. I think he had something else going on. And even the book, Michael Crichton didn't want to write a sequel to Jurassic Park, but Spielberg kept saying, hey, the first movie was really successful, you need to write another one. And I think that's why he brought back Ian Malcolm for the second one, because he actually dies in the first book. He's dead, but then he's the main character of the second book. And I think it was kind of his way of just saying, like, this is how much I don't care about this and how ridiculous it is. I'm going to bring a character back to life and just say, oh yeah, I guess I wasn't actually dead, I'm still alive. And he also, the first book was very PG-13. I guess it's way more violent than the movie because they're using rocket launchers to blow up the raptors and stuff. But the second book, pretty much right from the beginning, is throwing F-bombs all over the place. And it feels like he's trying to say, I dare you to make this movie and make it not stupid. And the movie only takes the basic kind of setup from the book anyway, and then completely goes in a different direction.
Well, I'm only comparing the first movie to the second movie. I have not read either book.
Yeah, the second book is still good, too. There's a lot of interesting stuff he has to say about evolution and stuff, but it's definitely not as good as the first one.
In terms of the movies, the introduction of the dinosaurs in The Lost World was so lame. So in the first one, you get that false reveal right at the beginning with that crane or whatever it is.
Yeah.
I like that a lot. And when you finally do see them, the camera has to zoom way out to show how literally and figuratively this is a huge deal. And the music matches, and it just all works together very well. And in The Lost World, when the dinosaurs first appear, the team is walking in a river or something, and the dinosaurs just show up and walk in front and behind them. They're just in the middle of a pack of dinosaurs, and they didn't realize it until they came into the frame. And they're not very big, and half the characters don't even seem to notice them. It's really lackluster, and the music with that dumb theme plays, and it's like, yeah, It just sets up everything else. And in terms of characters, in the first movie, the villain is John Hammond. He is the bad guy. He just doesn't realize that he's the bad guy.
Right. Which is much more explicit in the book.
And the only person on his team is his lawyer. I think they say his name once because he's not an important character. He's just a very one-dimensional lawyer. And I think Hammond even says, the only one on my side is the blood-sucking lawyer. He doesn't even say his name because it's not important. And we see him get eaten off of the toilet relatively early. And it's like, okay, because he was not important. But John Hammond is really the main villain. And he slowly, in the movie, changes to kind of realize maybe this isn't the best idea. But then even after that, he can't fully come to terms that he's in over his head, that he should stop. Because in the Lost World, he's like, yeah, there's another island, and I'm going to do it right this time. And Jeff Goldblum is justified in being like, you're still an idiot. And his idea to ensure that the island is isolated is done by letting the whole world know about this island with dinosaurs.
Okay, I don't remember that. That's really funny.
So everyone in the first movie is a good guy, except for Hammond and his lawyer. And Nedry, I guess.
You guess.
Yeah, but he's kind of on his own. But Hammond is surrounded by people who are constantly telling him why this is not a good idea. And it helps turn him around a little bit. Whereas in The Lost World, everybody is the bad guy. The only good guy is Jeff Goldblum. So he has no chance because he's surrounded only by people who are telling him why he's wrong. And even he's an idiot. The good guys are supposed to be the people on his team, who's Julianne Moore, Vince Vaughn, and Toby from The West Wing. But none of these characters have any character development or growth. Julianne Moore is there because she just wants to see it and prove some of her theories. I think that's about as far as she goes. But then she's the one who's picking up the T-Rex baby being like, let's go. And Vince Vaughn is like, I want to take pictures and be famous. It's like, okay. And then Toby from The West Wing says, I don't normally go into the field, but I had to see this. And then when the dinosaurs show up, he goes, huh. And that's it. That's his character. And you said you liked Roland, the hunter, who is Pete
Correct. I mean, I don't know if I'd say I liked him, but he stands out at least compared to everybody else.
But he is probably the most one-dimensional out of all of them. It's embarrassing because he says to the main bad guy or whatever, I'm a hunter, I'm here to kill a T-Rex. Do not ask me any questions about who I am or anything else about me.
Yeah, I think it's more that the actor makes a good bad guy. But I agree that there's not really... It feels like they just kind of went through the motions of putting in things that they needed for a story, and then that was it.
But then calling it out explicitly by having them say, I don't want to talk about anything. Oh, man.
And the fact that Jeff Goldblum's character is completely different from the first movie. The things that made him an appealing character in the first movie are not there in the second movie.
Right, and part of it is because there's no chance, because they're always running from something. And it really stood out to me, too, how they eventually get to this command center on this second island, where John Hammond says, yes, this island was meant to let the dinosaurs breed and just kind of live in the wild, and then we would transport them to Jurassic Park. But on the Jurassic Park island, they had these gigantic electrified fences. They had all of this security, which didn't work in the end, but at least it was there. And on this island, where the dinosaurs are allowed to run wild, they have none of that. They have a command center building with a chain link fence around it. And when Vince Vaughn shows up and busts in, to activate the radio or whatever, I was like, yeah, but how is this building even standing? If you got T-Rexes and freaking all this shit just running around wild, you got a fence that would be the same fence around a baseball field? But it made money, and you could probably get some toys at McDonald's or something. I'm sure there's a shit ton of licensing tie-ins with this.
And at least it still feels more like a real movie than Jurassic Park 3 or, what's the other one, Jurassic World. I didn't watch any past Jurassic World.
I've seen Jurassic Park 3 once, and I have no desire to watch it again. And I haven't seen any of the new ones. I read up a synopsis on them, and they sounded so dumb. Even I have to watch this. My curiosity's piqued. Like, that's not even happening.
Yeah, I mean, I saw Jurassic World in the theater, I think, and I expected it to be terrible, and it was, but I will say it was at least entertaining. It wasn't good. I wouldn't recommend it to anybody, but I wasn't bored. Unlike 3 and probably that one.
So, do not watch this movie ever. I watched Daybreakers from 2009, which also had Sam Neill in it.
Okay, I feel like I've seen that before. Is it Ethan Hawke and like Lawrence Fishburne?
No, Lawrence Fishburne is not in this.
Okay. I'm pretty sure I've seen it, but I don't remember.
Vampires are now the dominant species, but it was actually caused by, I think, a virus, but everyone's a vampire. And the movie really had me super into it for the first 10 minutes because they were discussing really the practical ramifications of everybody being a vampire, but we still have to continue society. And I was like, all right, I'm sold. Let's go with this because they still have, real world problems in addition to, well, we can't walk into the sun. But then it quickly turned into just a generic action movie that was dumb. And I feel like if somebody took those first 10 minutes and said, I'm going to make a different movie and just focus on that, it would be really good. Ethan Hawke is a blood researcher or something like that. That's going to be pretty much my entire recap of this movie. It's going to end with or something like that. Because even though I watched it this month, I can't tell you much about it. He works for this company and he's looking for a blood substitute because the humans are running out and they have to ration people. But then he eventually, he eventually finds a cure to change them back into humans. So to get rid of this virus. And he finds it via Willem Dafoe, who was a vampire, but is now human. And Ethan Hawke is like, how did you change back? What happened? And it turns out it was so good because it was so dumb. Willem Dafoe says, I was driving in my car, and he kind of drives around like Spike in Buffy, and they had computers or some shit that they can view outside of the car, which seems like just develop a vehicle that doesn't need that, but whatever. And he hit something and went flying out of the windshield. So he was exposed to the sun. And as he was burning up, he landed in a lake, and being in the lake protected him somehow. And his exposure in the sun, the briefness of it was the perfect time where it eliminated the virus but did not kill him. And I had to watch that part twice just to make sure that that's what he said. It was so stupid. So Ethan Hawke says, okay, so if we can basically just expose people to the sun for the right amount of time, then it will cure them. So he puts himself in this vat with a little window at the top, and they keep opening it up for a little bit longer every time and say, nope, he's still a vampire. Nope, he's still a vampire. Oh man, it was so good. And then eventually they figure out that if someone is cured and a vampire bites them, that vampire will also be cured. So it's kind of a reverse plague type thing. Yeah, it's so dumb. It doesn't make any sense.
It sounds pretty funny, but I don't know.
It was really funny, but it was just, I had walked in expecting kind of a serious dumb movie, but it was just the most ridiculous dumb movie, but trying to pretend that it was serious.
Okay, I can see why I don't remember anything about this, but I'm still pretty sure that I've seen it.
And Willem Dafoe's dialogue is terrible. It's like Stephen King wrote it, and you can tell when he's going to say something stupid that's supposed to be like a classic one-liner from this movie, because even his speech patterns, he'll say a sentence, he'll pause, the camera will kind of zoom up into his face, he'll look right at the camera, and turn and say something just idiotic as f***. And I could just see dumb people in the theater going, oh yeah! I love William Dafoe! So don't watch this movie either. I did everyone a service by watching every movie this month that you should never watch.
Oh, man.
Except Plant Terror, that was good. And the last thing I watched was Evil Dead 2 from 1987. I had the DVD from forever ago, and I finally picked up the Blu-ray. And it's been a long time since I watched this movie, and I was like, I want to see what it looks like Blu-ray too. And I think it was approved by, director of photography or whatever, like the transfer and all that stuff. Do you like the first one or the second one better?
Personally, I like the first one better, but I think part of it is not so much what's in the movie as the way you can kind of feel the way the movie was made as you're watching it. Like the creativity of just how they put things together and stuff like that. The second one feels a lot more like an actual movie, I guess. I do like the cinematography in the second one a lot. I will say that.
And the humor really pops up in the second one that is really not present at all in the first one.
Yeah.
And I wonder why Sam Raimi decided to do that. I mean, I feel like that's much more of his style of filmmaking, but then why didn't he put any humor in the first one?
I don't remember for sure. I read Bruce Campbell's first autobiography out of like 5 or however many he's written. But I think, because for the first one, I'm pretty sure they made a horror movie just because they said that's something we can do with a low budget and get it out there and market it. And for the second one, I think it was whoever had the rights to the first one or whatever coming back and saying you need to make another one because it was successful. So it wasn't Sam Raimi saying I want to make a sequel. And I think in order to make it interesting for him to make, he decided to like turn it into a comedy.
And it's not even really a sequel. It's kind of a retelling with different people.
Yeah, well, the reason for that was because they wanted to use footage from the first movie at the beginning to kind of recap, but then they weren't able to get the footage for whatever reason, so they had to just kind of reshoot stuff. So it wasn't supposed to feel like a remake like that. It was supposed to be a direct sequel, but it kind of throws in some weird retconning stuff like that. And the same thing even happened with Army of Darkness, where they initially couldn't get the footage from Evil Dead 2, and so they were reshooting some stuff, but then they got the footage. So then you do have some new shots and some old shots in Army of Darkness, which is weird. I don't know.
Yeah. I read a novella by Robert A. Heinlein called Universe from 1941.
Okay, I don't think I've ever even heard of that.
Well, we all live in the universe, if that helps.
Oh, that's what it is. Okay.
Humanity lives on a gigantic spaceship, and they have access to the knowledge of humanity, but the practical application of everything has kind of fallen by the wayside, so eventually everybody gets kind of dumb and misinterprets all of the science. So they take literal things figuratively. So saying two magnets, north and south will be attracted to each other. Instead of looking at that from a purely scientific standpoint of like physics and whatever, they think of attraction as like people attraction. You know what I mean? It's hard to explain, but basically they take science, turn it into feelings and emotions and like, it's so hard to explain, but then they call that science.
Okay.
And there's this elite group of people who are the scientists, and that's in quotes. And then everyone else is just really, really dumb and are just workers to keep the ship going. And in their mind, the ship is the universe. It's everything that exists. So this one dude who is a worker, the scientists say, hey, we think you would be a good scientist. So we're going to kind of train you and stuff. And he eventually goes to a deck that is forbidden. There's a whole bunch of decks that are forbidden. And as they go higher up, the gravity lessens. And they know there are mutants on the ship. And they're usually in those forbidden sections, and they just don't interact with them. So this guy eventually gets kidnapped, and one of the mutants, who has two heads, who argue with each other, it's very comical, actually understand science as science really is. And they say, this guy, even though he's dumb, he has potential. He might come around to understanding the way things actually are. And at first, it's very tough for him because, the ship is the universe and, religion and everything is all based around the ship. But then they prove to him that the ship is traveling through space and there are other things out there. So at first, he just collapses and it's just impossible for him to believe. But then eventually he comes around and he learns a lot of stuff. I thought it was interesting that for the mutants who know the way things really are, it was pointed out that the one thing they weren't able to differentiate was fiction. So, in their minds, all of this fictional stuff had actually happened as well. So, if they found, the book Dracula, they would be like, well, vampires were real, too, in addition to, real life stuff.
Okay.
Thought that was interesting. That didn't really come up too much. I wish it had, but it just talked about who their favorite fictional characters were, but they thought they were real.
Yeah, that sounds like, in itself, an interesting potential for a story.
Right, and it was thrown away in, maybe 1 or 2 sentences. So eventually this guy goes back to the rest of humanity and they say, well, we just assumed you were dead. And he says, no, but he's trying to find somebody safe to tell the things he's found out. So he goes to who he thinks is safe, but they're not safe. And they say, okay, we got to chuck this guy into the engine now. But the mutants end up rescuing him and he pulls one person back. And he says slowly we'll be able to convert enough people to man enough stations to take control of the ship and actually fly it to a different place. And that's where it ends. It was a very interesting story. Got a little actiony at the end. a little cliche, but I mean, it was 1941, so was it really cliche back then? I don't know. And I followed that up by a story by C.M. Kornbluth, such a good sci-fi writer name, called The Marching Morons, from 10 years later, so this was 1951, which actually made me think of Daybreakers. It was pretty funny, because there's this guy who goes through some kind of cryogenic freezing process. No, maybe he gets electrocuted. I can't remember. Something happens.
Those are two completely different things, but okay.
And this is in like present time, or 1951 time, I guess, where something goes wrong and it keeps him alive indefinitely, but he's in a coma. So his body doesn't age. And then in the future, far, far, far future, they realize that what had happened was a procedure they have perfected over time. So they wake him up. And he is, at first, very disoriented and trying to figure out what's going on. And it turns out that humanity is stupid. So this is a very recurring theme. Everybody in the past thought we would be stupid now. How wrong they were. So all of humanity is really, really stupid, and it's kind of, except for a small chunk. And the small chunk is what the guy considers aristocrats. And he's like, you're probably like controlling all of humanity and making them do whatever you want for your own benefit. And they say, actually, it's the opposite. They're actually controlling us because they outnumber us so much. And we're trying to prevent them from continuing to procreate, and we've fooled them into thinking they live in this technological paradise, but really everything's falling apart, and we don't know what to do, because humanity's going to end itself. So, for example, they have these vehicles, and they say these vehicles travel at like 300 miles an hour, but when the woken up guy gets in one, he's like, it really feels like we're going like 50 miles an hour. And they say, yes, that's actually true, but what we've done is we put really loud noisemakers and like fans and stuff around, so the people inside perceive that they're going really fast. They perceive that everything in their world is like super advanced and futuristic, when really it's not, and it's actually falling apart. So we need some way to save our species. And he says, all right, I can help you, but I want to be dictator of the earth. I want my entire continent to myself, all of this stuff. And they say, fine, whatever. So he basically tells all of the dumb people that Venus is a paradise. And if you go there, you won't have to worry about anything ever again. But in reality, it's just a part of Earth that's just barren and full of tundra and just shit. And these people see like TV advertisements and stuff. And even though before they had known that space travel to other planets was not possible or failed because they're so dumb and they just keep getting these ads, and then everyone around them starts seeing it and doesn't want to feel left out, so they all start talking about it. So eventually everyone decides, I'm going to go to Venus. And at the very end, the people who are still intelligent are just fed up with this guy being such a dick to everybody that they lock him in a rocket and shoot him out into space where he dies.
So you just spoiled the whole thing. All right.
It was a really interesting story. I really liked it. I liked the twists of how you thought things were going to go, but then it turned out it was the complete opposite. And you would think things like, well, he's going to work to make humanity better, but immediately he's just like, no, I want to rule everybody. I want to be the ruler of the earth. It was really cool. 1951. We had such high expectations. Look how far we've come. Now, see, someone's going to be listening to this in the year 2323. And they're going to say, man, they were really stupid back then.
I think people are probably saying that now, but yeah.
See, you're already advanced. You just don't realize it. I read The Last Essential X-Men, Volume 11, which covered 1991.
Okay.
So this includes X-Men 273 through 280, a couple X Factors, and then at the end, it was new volume of X-Men, which was 1, 2, and 3 of that.
So that's the very end of Chris Claremont's original run, then. That's where he left.
Correct. Angel has been changed by Apocalypse, but that doesn't actually happen in this. That's X Factor. There's a bunch of Shi'ar stuff. It kind of closes up the entire Shi'ar thing, which hasn't been brought up for a long time. When Lilandra was supplanted by her sister, is that correct?
Deathbird? I don't remember.
Yeah, Deathbird. Who was actually being controlled by somebody else, I'm pretty sure. Because, it's a comic book. That's how it always works. And there's this huge arc where there's that kid who can absorb energy, and he keeps absorbing it, but as he absorbs it, he gets really fat. So there's this other person in all this armor who keeps taking him, saying, like, suck up all the energy. And he's like, no. And they're like, yes, do it. And it turns out it's his mom, because the goal is to try and recreate Proteus.
Why? Just, like, for their own benefit, I assume.
Yeah, for power. Because it's a comic book. That's always the answer. So Moira is also walking around, and this is the point where Moira is all, like, badass and shit. And whenever anyone sees her, they go, whoa, what happened to you? And she and her, like, 3 threads of clothing is like, I'm a badass now. There's a lot of New Mutant stuff, and it also closes up, or attempts to close up, Professor X and Shadow King, like their final duel. In the new volume, Claremont and Jim Lee kind of take it together, and story-wise, it's Magneto up on Asteroid M, basically saying the same stuff he's always been saying.
Is that where Fabian Cortez first shows up?
Yeah.
Okay.
And the X-Men say, hey, like, don't do this, and he's like, I am going to do this. It's pretty compelling. So it wasn't the most exciting volume. I mean, Claremont kind of had to close up everything he was doing, but it felt like some of it was just kind of, I don't know how to do this, but I'm going to do it anyway. And I followed that up with the first Essential X-Factor volume, which jumped back. This was 1986 and 1987. And it answered a lot of questions, because I had a lot of X-Factor stuff in the Essential X-Men volumes that I didn't understand. So X-Factor is the original X-Men team, but posing as mutant hunters. And their goal is to find mutants and bring them in, but then train them to control their powers. But they do it under the guise of, we're hunting these dudes down, which it doesn't make sense on so many fronts.
Yeah.
I mean, first off, that they are the same people, and they've been the original X-Men team and have, like, saved the world and the universe countless times, and they're just walking around. I mean, Cyclops has to walk around with his freaking glasses on, his red glasses, and nobody says, hey, you look like Cyclops. They don't even wear disguises. Their disguises are wearing street clothes, but that's not a disguise.
I mean, you can tell that they realized pretty early on that it didn't really work.
They go a lot of issues before they make that realization.
Well, I think because they already had it set up, but they kind of, once, is it Louise Simonson comes in around issue, like, 7 or something?
Yeah.
She didn't like that whole idea, and she was like, we gotta do something else.
And Cameron Hodge is behind the whole initiative, and he is Warren's roommate, college roommate, something like that. He's his buddy. From reading X-Men, I know that he ended up betraying them and everything. But it's pretty clear that he's doing it because he just does all these ad campaigns about, like, mutants are dangerous. Like, they'll kill you if they just look at you. The rest of X-Factor is like, I guess it's working. But then when they get a call and they go out to hunt a mutant, and that mutant sees them and goes, oh shit, it's X-Factor, and tries to blow them up, and they're like, wait, no. It's like, why wouldn't they do that?
Yeah.
You know, there's all this, like, advertising campaign of, like, they're gonna kill you if you're a mutant, and then they show up. And there's this huge thread of Scott being just a fucking baby with Jean and Madeline, because nobody can keep track, nobody can keep track of when anybody's alive or dead, even though they all live on the same planet. They just hear from somebody else, this person's dead, and they take it at face value. They don't do any more investigation or anything. They don't ask anybody else any questions. They just say they're dead. And then they show up alive later, and they're like, what? They were alive the whole time? That one random-ass news thing I heard must have been false? That was 8 months ago? So Jean is all like, oh, you love Madeline, but not me. And he's like, I don't know. But then he's like, no, I do love you. But then freaking he sees a picture of Madeline or something. They go to where the Phoenix died. And, you know, he's like, oh, now I don't know anymore. And she's like, oh, and everyone's crying and just being babies. And then it turns out, I thought this was really dumb, that Jean was never actually the Phoenix. The Phoenix was a psychic clone of Jean or something. And Jean was so good that that's what caused the Phoenix to kill itself, was the goodness that it had pulled from Jean.
Yeah, they had to come up with some really dumb way to get Jean back.
They succeeded.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I think it would have been better if they just created a new character instead of bringing Jean back.
And then Jean's using her psychic shit, and they're like, oh, it's a firebird around Jean. Could she be the Phoenix? And it's like, what?
Yeah, does that get resolved in there? I don't remember what happens with that.
And there's recaps, or maybe the same issues, of when the Marauders went into the Morlock tunnels and killed everybody. So I already knew that happened.
You do get the early Apocalypse stuff, though. who was originally supposed to be the Owl, the Daredevil villain. And when Louise Simonson came in, she was like, yeah, you're going to have to take out the last page of that previous issue where it turns out it's the Owl because we're going to have to come up with somebody else.
So they do eventually pull in some kids. They have Boom Boom.
Oh, yeah.
Richter, who's the earthquake guy. Rusty, who's the fire guy. Artie, who is the dude with the big eyes who can project images but can't talk. And Leech, who is also a little dude who has broken English and steals people's powers. Or doesn't steal them, he negates them.
Does Rusty have a name? Code name?
He probably does, but as you can tell, he's so important that,
They do get their development.
They do. It's not as dumb as like when Jubilee was introduced. I was afraid it would be. Oh, and Skids, who has the personal force field where things just bounce or slide off of her.
Oh, yeah.
Which doesn't really have a lot of practical application outside of not getting shot. And even after she learns to control it, she's like, now I can make out with you, Rusty. And he's like, cool. I'm like, really? That's your character arc?
Wait, but how did she eat before that if she didn't have control of it or whatever?
That's a good question.
How did she use the restroom?
That's an even better question.
And is she related to Unis the Untouchable? Did they say that?
I don't think so.
Okay, because he basically had the same power back in, like, the 60s X-Men.
I played We Love Katamari, the remake. Well, not remake, the remaster. We Love Katamari originally came out in 2005.
Was that the second one?
Yes. It built a lot on the first one, and the first one was such a unique and cool idea, and executed, I felt, pretty well. And the second one is just more polish on that. So, similar. You just roll a Katamari, which is a ball, and you pick up little things, and then as it gets bigger, you can pick up bigger things, and then it can pick up bigger things. Eventually, you're picking up planets, which is cool. It's very simplistic in terms of gameplay. But for the second one, they do add a little more variety of, like, the types of missions. It's not just make it this big. It's only pick up these things, or get to this spot in time, or throw in a little bit more variety. And it was interesting, because somebody was watching me play it, and they said, you know what this looks like? It looks like all of those ads I see on the internet for clickbait games. And I said, why? And they're like, well, it's so colorful and cartoony. And I was like, that's interesting.
Yeah. I thought you were going to say they said it looked like Teletubbies. Because, again, everything's colorful. Everything looks like it's kind of made out of foam. And, the Prince guy and those characters look kind of like Teletubbies, I guess. I don't know.
I played Super Mario All-Stars from 1993, which was released on the Super Nintendo, which was a complete remake from the ground up of Super Mario Bros. 1, 2, 3, and the Japanese Super Mario Bros. 2, which we got as the Lost Levels. And I played through all of them. And I don't know back in the day if these got a lot of hype, but there's a lot going on here to remake 3 games from scratch and to release an unreleased game over here as well. And there's really, really good sprite work going on for all of this. I was impressed the entire way through. And they didn't even use the same sprites for all of them. And the Lost Levels are hard, man. I can see why it didn't come out over here. Because originally, they didn't release Super Mario Bros. 2 over here in the States because A, they felt it was too repetitive, and B, it was too hard. They are hard, even from the beginning. It's like pro-level stuff. I did beat it, got all the way through World D. You can only get to World 9 if you don't use any warps from 1 through 8. And if you actually did that back in the day, I'm pretty sure Nintendo Power, you could like mail away for a patch that was like a no warp patch or something, which would be so cool if somebody still had that.
So wait, so how does the order work in Japan then?
Our Super Mario Bros. 2, which is the one where you pick up the vegetables and stuff and you can pick from the 4 different characters to play each level.
This is all new to me, but okay.
That was released later in Japan as Super Mario USA.
Okay.
But it's going to go even more because that game originally was not a Mario game. It was a game in Japan called Doki Doki Panic, and the characters kind of had a Aladdin-type feel to them. It wasn't a Mario game at all. And they retooled it and released it in the United States as Super Mario Bros. 2 and just changed the main characters and a couple other things to Mario characters.
Interesting.
So over there, they have pretty much the same game, but one is called Doki Doki Panic and one is called Super Mario USA. And over here, their Super Mario Bros. 2 is Super Mario Bros. The Lost Levels. Very confusing. But that was the time. I mean, look at freaking Final Fantasy. Hey, I'm going to play Final Fantasy 3. You mean Final Fantasy 6? What?
Which I will get back to. Wait, actually, no, I guess it would be... Wait. Yes, it is that one.
See? But yeah, the games are really good. The translation to the Super Nintendo, in terms of physics and everything, is also good, because that can go south very easily. The music arrangements are good. Everything's pretty good. And I know they even released another version that has those 4 games plus Super Mario World on it too, which is a lot. I mean, for some people, that's their entire childhood on one cart. You know, it's not just porting them over, because they could have done that too. They could have just said, here's Mario 1, 2, and 3. They remade them from the ground up. And I finished Tears of the Kingdom. And when I say finished, I mean I am not going to play it anymore. I did the last fight. I thought the build up to the last fight was so good as you're slowly making your way down. And then after I did that, I said, okay, now I'm going to do a bunch of extra stuff that I hadn't done, like get some armor sets or get all the shrines. I didn't get all the armor sets, but I got the ones that I wanted, and I upgraded them to the max. And it's funny because, you know, it's like a lot of games where optional enemies are often harder than the final boss. But now I can take out King Gliax, I can take out Silver Lionels, like no big deal. And after I did that a bunch, I was like, okay, like there's not really much else for me to do here. I think there might be a couple side story quest things I hadn't done, so it's good. I know Breath of the Wild was the same way, and I never really went back to that one after I completed everything I wanted to do. And to your point of there's so many things to do in Breath of the Wild and like different ways to do them, in Tears of the Kingdom, I'm pretty sure I talked about this before, but there's a whole crafting factor where you can build stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And it was revealed a while ago that this game came out in 2023, but Nintendo said, we finished this game in 2022, and we spent an entire year only working on the physics of all of this stuff, which is really cool.
Yeah.
An entire year just on that, and it worked. I mean, you can go online and find all this crazy stuff that people are making. Definitely a worthwhile game, and I'm glad I finished it before I started Pikmin 4, which I'm so pumped about. So next month I'll be talking about that. So we're halfway through 2023.
More than halfway through. This is month 7.
And you'll probably be watching this in 2024. So hopefully we will not be vampires then. Or else you'll have to watch it at night. Even though it could be inside during the day.
Yeah. Well, thanks for listening. Thanks for watching. Thanks for everything.
Do we put these up as podcasts too?
Do we or can we?
I thought you did that.
I didn't. I don't know how to do that. I don't even know where to do that.
Maybe we should, because we don't really show a lot while we're talking.
Yeah, if we can figure it out. So keep an eye out for that in 2095 or whatever.
Technology's hard.
Actually, no, you know what? Anybody out there that listens to podcasts, where do you listen to podcasts? I know there's some on like Spotify or something, but I mean, I don't really do that, so.
Probably going to get 20 million answers back.
Well, that's good. We can use at least maybe 2 or 3 of those that'll actually be useful.
Yeah, how's our TikTok channel doing? Thanks for watching.